Russia launching even more airstrikes on Ukraine overnight, killing one person and injuring several others. President Trump confirming yesterday he spoke to Russia's Vladimir Putin about setting up a sit-down meeting with Ukraine's Zelensky. But nothing has been scheduled yet. President Trump is urging the two leaders to come to the table.
Well, that's going to be up to them. It takes two to tango. I always say it. And they should meet, I think, before I have a meeting and probably close the deal. But I think it's appropriate they meet. They do not exactly get along well, as you can understand. And I'm sure it's a meeting that perhaps he didn't like, but he wasn't happy about coming to the United States either. That was a big concession, and I appreciate the fact that he did. But we'll see what happens over the next week or two, and at that point I'll step in very strongly, and if I have to be there, I'll be there. And we'll either have a deal or we won't. But a lot of people are dying, and I want to get us.
Joining me now is Fox News senior strategic analyst General Jack Keane. General, good morning to you. And a lot of news was made yesterday at the White House. What did you make of President Trump's comments?
Yeah, well, I think we're in something of a diplomatic pause. You know, it's been a week since we saw the flurry of activity here, which was really quite substantive. You know, following the Alaska meeting a week ago Friday with President Trump and President Putin, we saw the European leaders and Zelensky come to Washington on Monday and sit down and truly exhibit some passion and energy for a peace agreement. Obviously, they were united, but it was much more than that. There was a commitment and resolve to get on with it. I think they were kind of exhibiting the president's energy around this. But much has fallen now to a meeting that Putin agreed to with President Trump to meet Zelensky. But here we have Lavrov, you know, Putin's foreign minister, who's been associated with him for over 20 years, on a Sunday talk show from the United States, saying, well, we'll have a meeting, but the agenda is not right yet, and we have to get the agenda right. And then the agenda comes down to no Western troops in Ukraine. If there is a peace agreement, they shouldn't have any veto authority over something like that. That's up to Ukraine and their security needs. And, of course, throwing out again no NATO membership and all the other major issues that Russia has had. You know, when you draw back from it and look at it, you can see what Putin is doing. He still believes his major strategic objective, Cheryl, is take control of Ukraine and expand into Eastern Europe. And there's nothing that has yet been able to deter him that the best pathway to achieve that is continuing the war in Ukraine. That is where he is. And until such time as he looks at that and says, I can't get there, I don't see him coming to the negotiating table. He wants more concessions right now, and some of the concessions he wants, like give up the Donbass territory, I don't think that's likely going to happen. So the president will have a tough decision if we don't get this meeting coming forward. And he certainly has a lot of arrows in this quiver here, and we've all talked about it, and you at some level of detail, in tariffs and sanctions, but also opening up Russia to long-range offensive weapons by the Ukrainians. That should be on the table, and certainly stopping Russia cold in their offensive mission. We can upgun Ukraine to make certain that happens and give them some counterattack capability as well. But what is Putin doing? He's continuing to pound Ukraine's citizens. Over the weekend, 574 drones, 40 missiles, killing civilians. It's a war crime. And then he continues to rush his soldiers into Ukrainians' defensive positions, poorly trained, thousands of casualties, and moving at a glacial pace, to be quite frank about it. No significant operational breakthroughs. And you look at that, and you can understand the president's frustration. But Putin, as of yet, doesn't seem to want to move to the negotiating table and stop this conflict. Hopefully, the next week or two, we can move him in that direction.
Well, and Zelensky also doesn't have the support of this from his people. 78% of Ukrainians reject the idea of any deal that gives unoccupied territory to Russia. That is something that had been discussed. I mean, that's just a recent poll that was taken in Keane. There was also some breaking news out of Israel that I wanted to ask you about. They struck a hospital in the Gaza Strip 2 times yesterday. It killed at least 20 people, including 5 journalists. President Trump not happy about these latest attacks, telling Israel to end the war soon. Listen.
It's a terrible situation over there, terrible, terrible situation. But it's coming to a head, it's coming to an end, and I think that we will have, I think within the next 2 to 3 weeks, you're going to have pretty good conclusive ending. And it's a hard thing to say because they've been fighting for thousands of years, if you want to know. That's been a hotbed forever. But I think we're doing a very good job. But it does have to end. But people can't forget October 7th.
General, do you see this war ending anytime soon?
Well, I do see it. I do see it ending, certainly in the sense that Hamas will be defeated if Israel continues their campaign. But the reality is, first of all, let's deal with the first thing, the hospital attack. Israel has admitted that that was a mistake, and innocent people were killed as a result of that horrific mistake. And humans make mistakes in war, and sometimes they can be tragic. And this is one of those instances. What Netanyahu is doing, Cheryl, he's pursuing a dual strategy. One, he's got his troops beginning a campaign in Gaza City to finish Hamas, to reduce their control over the Gazan people. He's moving the people out of Gaza City to the south and to the coast to get them away from that conflict as best as possible. And because he's threatening this major campaign, Hamas has come forward and put a ceasefire deal on the table and a hostage release. That negotiation is taking place. And it proves once again the point that he has consistently made, is that if you keep the pressure on Hamas, that is the only way you're going to get a deal out of them that's reasonable. After all, it was Hamas that shut down the last deal, remember, that Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump wanted to bring to completion to get the hostages, at least part of the hostages, out. That deal fell apart because of Hamas. Now they're back wanting to talk again. Why? Because the Israeli troops are getting closer to them, and they feel that pressure. So this is the dual strategy. It's going to take some time to unfold.
General Jack Keane, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, and there's so much going on around the world. Really appreciate you. Thank you, sir.